Conversations with Grandfather, Volume 2, Decoding Grandfather's Second Prophecy. We're kind of titling this Decoding Grandfather's Prophecies. I want to finish this series before I start deciphering any other part of my books for people. Or decoding is another word we're using. And I didn't like that because there's so many movies out decoding this or decoding that. And the way I look at it, knowing the man Grandfather, as I did, there's no decoding to it. It is spelled out. But then I realize that it's spelled out to me. You don't know him, not like I did, not in flesh and blood. Granted, every one of you have tapped into Grandfather in one way, shape, or form. But you don't know the man every day. You don't know his inflection, his emotion, his commitment, his beliefs that he used when he conveyed a story. My God, talk about someone reliving a story. I would watch Grandfather change his entire face and facial expressions so that he was just telling it. Here at 85, 86 years old, if you looked at him and you kind of blurred your eyes a little bit, he'd be 23, 25 years old. It was amazing. I could see him reliving a story where every muscle would move, like he was talking about swinging through trees. I could actually see one arm and then another arm and then another arm flex with that movement. He was so caught up, so captivated by reliving it. One of the hardest jobs I do, I think, is to take what Grandfather taught me over nearly 11 years through example most of the time, not in words. Grandfather used an economy of words when he taught. It was by example that he taught. What the hardest thing for me is taking that 11 years and distilling it down into a language that everybody can understand. To take something Grandfather took weeks to teach and distilling it down into a paragraph and even sometimes a sentence. What pains me so is when Grandfather would teach something, he would send Rick and I out to do it. And when I am running a class, I say, okay, go out, you got 30 minutes. Knowing damn full well in my mind that 30 minutes for Rick and I was 3 days, 3 weeks, 3 months, day in, day out, practicing it until we reached that level of proficiency that Grandfather wanted. So that was the difficult thing. The other thing is when I write my books, as you know, I'm a fanatical journal keeper. They go with me every place. 3, 4 different journals. One on skills, one on what I do all day, one on philosophy and spirituality, another one just for the hell of it. And every day I write. In the morning and in the evening. I've been that way since I've been a kid. A lot of people think, Tom, your writing, meaning the way I write, script, is so neat. Did your parents beat you into writing that way? No, they didn't. I remember Grandfather, like I said, was sometimes like a hand grenade waiting to go off. And when he went off, there would be these volumes of information that he would spew out. And I got to a point at 7 years old, I better start going home and writing this in my notebook. I still have that first notebook. And to this day, I still can't read it. I scrawled it, in 7 years old. How good a writer can you be? Big block letters, a little script, that kind of thing. I couldn't read it. And that was a wake-up call, because a few months later, I went back to something he said. And I said, I better write better. So I trained myself to write in this very anal retentive way. And another thing people ask me is, Tom, how come you can speak so well in public? After all, you grew up a big dumb hick. You can thank the trees for that. Thank grandfather for that. When he said to me, tell the trees, as we call tree preaching. And I got those trees out there, taught me to become very eloquent. Because it wasn't long after I went down there and spewed out my problems to the trees, and I really started to get into it like a hellfire and brimstone preacher, that I realized that the trees were teaching me something more. It was more than the trees. It was the very fabric of the consciousness of the Spirit that moves through all things. It was the spirit world. My God, even the Creator, the great mystery, seemed to be listening to me. Because not only did I purge myself of all those damn problems that I was wrestling with, but I was getting answers to questions that I wasn't even asking. So I knew those ripples, those concentric rings had to go beyond. So the difficult thing is writing these books. I got these stories. Yes, I go through this ritual, this process. I often joke with people that it takes me a year to write a book. 10, almost 11 months to research it. 1 month to write it. And it's funny because I start formulating it. What do I want to convey through these books? What do I want to preserve? And I get an idea of what is needed out there. Certainly, I don't decide it. I've learned long ago, there's a power beyond myself that directs it. I mean, my last book that I'm in the process of writing now, or almost writing now, has been through this metamorphosis. It's gone through 5 different titles since the ink has dried on the publisher's contract. And now I finally arrived at what I'm going to do. And the process at hand is simple. I will go back and dig through those dusty trunk full of journals and find the journals that I wrote back at the time a certain event or teaching happened. I'll read it again and again and again, and then I will go back to the exact area it happened and relive it several times. It could take me a week on and off to keep returning to that area, because I believe these areas possess the knowledge that was once given there. They possess the events. A few times in my life, I've gone to an area and I found the backyard of a subdivision. And knowing my stubborn nature, twice people called the cops on me. Yeah, the area didn't look the same. There was a 3,000 square foot house, a swimming pool, and I was between the swimming pool and the tree line, the only thing that existed when I was a kid, and sat there. Now, can you imagine somebody looking out the window and seeing this dirtbag sitting there with this look on his face like he's half out of his mind? Of course, the police come. Fortunately, the police come, they know me, and they say, it's only Tom. It's a lawn fixture, you know. And then the difficulty comes in finding these quotes from grandfather. in all of his broken English. And how much of a quote do I put in? How much can people understand? And then they say, once you're raised by a coyote, you become a coyote. I write my books from the belly of the coyote. I think that's the longest process. To go back through time after time after time and write it as a coyote. I don't have to do that with grandfather's quotes, because he already, he was shrewd that way. But it's my input, such as they are into the books, that I want to write at a coyote level. That's why I tell students, you read my books, any of them, and they read one way. They read the way you're supposed to read them, or the general public is supposed to read them. And some of them are a nice read, but I hope. And then people come through a standard class, and they go back and reread those books, and they don't read the same way. Then they take the big one, the philosophy one, and they go back and they reread those books again. And it's like they've never read them before. The meanings that are hidden in there by design are very shrewdly placed. I don't do anything by accident. Nothing. I tell my classes, look, to me, any class is a cross between a chess game and a jigsaw puzzle. The way people sit in a room, what they eat, break times, everything. The words I choose to use, the stories I choose to retell, relive. It's all very shrewdly chosen. There's hidden meanings. That's why I can pompously sit back and say, I doubt that if I have more than a handful of students in almost 30 years of running the tracker school that have mastered the standard class. Mastered it. Funny thing is none of them were ever instructors. None of them were instructors. Anyway, Carl and I were joking that when we did this first tape of Grandfather's Prophecies, it was like I finished it up by saying Merry Christmas, because it is not a delightful subject. It is hideous, to say the least. And every day, I'm watching his prophecies come true. You know, just the other day, for instance, I tell everybody, you know, what Grandfather said, basically, that when I am the age that he was when we first talked to stones together, that is the red skies. He was 83 when I met him. 83. I'll be 83 in 2033. I could tell you the month. April. I will be his age if I live that long. There's always that if. And you know what? Just a couple of days ago, an article came out. This big conference on global warming, and it addressed the fall of the Amazon rainforest. And at the rate it's falling today, it reaches a point of no return. where things, because of the absence of most of that rainforest, 60% gone, that the global impact will be catastrophic. Projected date in the paper, 2030. 2030. Thing is that grandfather would be the first to tell you there is no future. There is no future. Instead, there are possible futures. The analogy he gave was like the now is like the palm of our hand, and every finger is a probable future. A possible future, excuse me. But there's always one of those fingers that seem to be sucking the life out of all the rest. And that he defined as the probable future. That is what he prophesied, the probable future, which gives us, in a way, a sense of relief. We can still make a choice. We can still make a choice. There's still hope. How much hope? That remains to be seen. You see, I tell people, our individual lives are not etched in stone. Our destiny is not planned. The great mystery, the great Spirit, God, wants everything to be perfect. Wants it to be a Garden of Eden. No wars, no starvation, no diseases. People loving and working with other people. That, I believe, is what the Creator wants. But the problem is, the Creator gave us a choice. A choice. That's both a curse and a blessing. If we didn't have a choice, everybody'd be going about life like a great little mess of robots. Everything would be a hunky-dory little utopia. But it isn't. Because we have choice. We have choice to follow the light. To try to do something outside of ourselves. Follow a vision, a dream, a purpose beyond ourselves. To try to save the earth. The earth, one of the most precious gifts the Creator has given us. We're supposed to be her caretakers. And what have we done with the earth? We've spit in the Creator's face. So we can follow the light to try to heal people, to try to love people. Or the other choice is to follow darkness. The same disease that has destroyed the earth. The darkness of greed and convenience. Where earth is put there for our use, for our abuse, to rape, pillage, and plunder at will. Or we've got a choice to do what most people do, and that's become rank and file members of the mindless gray masses and do nothing. The only thing they know of the light is setting aside 1 hour of one day out of 7 for worship. And yet they can't even touch the God that they worship. Grandfather once said to me, "Grandson, don't confuse spirituality with worship. They're two different worlds." So we're faced with a choice every day, each one of us. The choices we have made is proving grandfather's prophecies true on a daily basis. On a daily basis. It's frightening. All of my life, I have been trying to prove grandfather wrong. He was the one who said to me, "Grandson, if you believe everything I'm telling you is true, then you're a fool. Your vision is not to believe me. Your vision is to prove me right or prove me wrong. And damn it, for 50 years I've been trying to prove that man wrong. Just once, grandfather, be wrong. Be wrong with these prophecies." But he's not. He's never wrong. When these prophecies were first delivered to me, I was 12 years old. And it wasn't just that one time on the hill. Because he too, in his good old time, would wait till we grasped a concept. And then later on, a few days later, a few weeks later, a few months or years later, he would build on something he said during that prophecy. You know, I started this school with hope. A lot of hope. That I could make a difference. That if I lived my vision, that I could yell, "Stop the destruction," and people would hear me. Boy, was I a fool. I a fool. Driving here today, I took a road that I don't normally take. I don't know why. More spiritually led than anything else. And as I hit that road, I started to think about, wow, the time Rick and I came through this area to get down to a certain area of the bay. I remember turning that corner. It was once a dirt road. Now 2 solid lanes and then some, and subdivision on both sides. What have I done? What have I done to prevent this? It haunts me. It haunts me having to carry the burden of grandfather's prophecies. It's like screaming in a storm. You're not heard. I look back on when those holes opened up in the sky, and I thought, yes, the beginning of the second prophecy. Now, mankind is going to take a look and say, look what we've done. We've got to change things. I held up so much hope. So a ripple went out to the societies of the world to stop using fluorocarbons and this and that and the other thing. And we shrank the holes. But they're not gone. They're not gone. It's like all of a sudden the mankind lets go of that held breath and say, yeah, we fixed it. No, we didn't fix it. We never trace it far enough back. It's like the dead dolphins that washed up on the beach all up and down the East Coast. And scientists were saying they seem like they're dying of an AIDS-like symptom. Normal diseases that they normally could beat off are ravaging their bodies. So they do this multi-million-dollar search, which concludes after a year and a half, that the dolphins' immune systems are weakened because as they migrate south into the Gulf of Mexico, they are eating fish that are poisoned by the red tides, which over the past X amount of years has seen massive blooms. We blamed it on nature because that's where the report ends. We didn't trace it back to why. Why? The fertilizers, the pesticides being dumped in to Lake Okeechobee and so many other waterways in Florida, in Texas, in Louisiana, creating this biome of perfect conditions for this red tide. We killed the dolphins. But no, we blamed it on nature. We blamed it on nature. It's just like with this new one, global warming. Whoa. This is the big one. This is the one people will surely see. And they did this poll. I think it was a joint poll between CNN and NBC or something like that, where more than half of the people polled did not care about global warming. And they didn't even poll the third world countries. Those countries that lust after our lifestyle. You know, we look at it. 1/3 of the world is well fed. 1/3 of the world is malnourished. And 1/3 of the world is starving. That's scary. Very scary. You know, people ask me, Tom, why all of a sudden are you doing this, recording? Why are you recording Grandfather, the book? Why are you running the classes you're running? Look at my school, the Tracker School, as a barometer for things that are happening out there. My fear level. You look at all of a sudden this influx of intensive classes. Why? Simply because in mainstream Tracker, some classes 80, some classes 110. I cannot teach these things. But look at the titles of them. Look at the titles. Hidden. There's a preparation going on. It's a preparation. And then look at what I call the preservation series that kind of started this way. The last class, The Way of the Void. The class before it, The Keepers of the Force. The class before it, Body Control. Look at all the series on the sacred elements of shelter, fire, water, food, baskets, stalking. Look at my next book, Field Guide to the Way of the Scout. My publisher said, well, why would he want to write such a book like that so people can stay hidden? Do you think my publisher would buy the truth? That I'm writing that book because I know when it happens, people have to be able to escape. No, I told my publisher, look at the records that they keep from general public. Look at them. You are in more danger in one of our national parks than you are walking at night in the cities of Harlem or even Newark. The rapes, the shootings, the robberies are off the wall. So I told my publisher, that's, so people can stay safe. Yeah, so people can escape. I want to preserve this knowledge. A lot of people say to me, Tom, are you going to die soon? I'll leave that up to speculation. Like Tom is in this headlong rush to preserve this information, to decipher, decode grandfather's prophecies and so much else because he's actually dying before us. Like my mother says, only the good die young. It ain't going anytime soon. Why I'm putting this all together? Why I'm putting this all together is because we're getting close. We're at the threshold of a decision for this society, the global society. Yeah, there's a promise I made to grandfather. Grandfather, I promise you I will pass this down. Knowing damn full well that I cannot pass this down mainstream tracker. Just ain't going to happen. There is never going to be a body control class again. Never Keepers of the Forest. Never Way of the Void. Last time. So I could say at the end of that class, driving away from there in tears in my eyes, grandfather, I fulfilled my promise. Kind of said, you didn't tell me how many people I had to fulfill it to. You know? Payback. But I did. I fulfilled it. I did as he asked. He also warned me that I would start fulfilling those promises as we got close. And it was funny. Yeah, close to annihilation, close to the Exodus, close to the red skies. And I look back on it, I swear to God, the spirit world pulled one over on me. Because when I went into this, when that first intensive workshop started in this series of preservation, I didn't see it coming. I just said, hey, yeah, without thinking of what grandfather said, it'd be nice to preserve this knowledge. It'd be nice to work with a small group of people. Then I look back. You know, I read through that first prophecy, talked through that first prophecy, relived it, retold it as grandfather told it to me, expanded on it, cut through much of the Coyote teaching. And after it was all over, I thought to myself, oh my God, I could have gone on for days. So many hidden meanings in there, hidden not to me, not to grandfather, but me knowing grandfather. As I said, his emotion, his inflection, everything else. There's so much more. The next book I'm reading is The Quest. Yeah, in a studio. And I made a comment. I said, just in 4 pages, I could do 10, 20 books. And those 4 pages are grandfather's prophecies. And I'm realizing after the last taping, I don't know how many hours, a good couple of hours, I look down the list and I say, oh God, can I go into that further and further and further? Just that, as I said, the state that he was in. That state of being somewhere between awake and asleep. That state is the visionary mind. The visionary mind. That is a mind so pure, you are ready to accept a prophecy, a vision of the probable and possible futures. I thought to myself, my God, I could run an entire class on just that state. It is so different than anybody learns in philosophy. It's so different than sensing presence. I remember people coming to me to take first the spiritual side of edible plants and then the spiritual side of medicinal plants. People are coming to me thinking, okay, we're going to go into a meditation, we're going to touch into the sacred silence, or we're going to go back into the sensing of presence, the state of presence. No. I use something else. Hunger for the edible plants. Craving for the medicinal plants. Totally different animal than any other mechanism that one uses for philosophy, spirituality, or anything else. So simple, that first prophecy, yet so profound. Where I write, grandfather finished his third vision quest at the eternal cave. He finished it. And then all of a sudden, he is given these 4 visions of man's destruction. It wasn't the 4th vision quest in his life. I mean, the 3rd vision quest in his life. He was in his 40s. But when that eternal cave surfaces, it is always visions of the probable and possible future. That's what one goes there for. That's what one will travel those hot, dusty, agonizing miles to reach. That cave, high up on that mesa, unseen from the ground. It is as if the journey itself prepares you for entrance into that cave. And where he says to me, he was awaiting sunrise. Such a simple concept that most readers out there will miss it. Most students will miss it. Sunrise, the power of the east, the power of the rising sun which drives away the ignorance of darkness. It was his 3rd vision quest. Power of the west, oncoming darkness, the setting sun. What happens in that winter of purification? Awaiting sunrise. There's a lot in those 4 prophecies that deal with the 4 sacred directions. Not hidden, obvious, so obvious. Like the 2 areas where he comes upon a village that is made of tents and cloth and not of natural materials. Why is that such a big deal? 1 sentence, it is a big deal. Here is people dying of starvation. Dying of starvation. Lack of water. And he was horrified. It was almost a sacrilege to him that this village was cloth, tents, this refugee camp. What he's saying is the people lost their skill. If they still possessed those ancient skills, those shelters would have been from their ancestry. would have been thatch and mud. Not cloth and tents. And he talks about going into this landscape that is hot and dry and arid. A world like he had never seen. Come on. Grandfather grew up in the Southwest. Hot, dry, and arid is a good definition of it, especially in northern Mexico where grandfather grew up. One hot place, one thankless place for survival. He wasn't talking about the landscape. He was talking about the people. Grandfather grew up in this clan where everybody his age were brothers and sisters, everybody younger were little brother, little sister, everybody older was mother and father, grandfather, grandmother. There was this sense of family, of tribe, of belonging. But he encountered these people. There was nothing. Nothing. That's what he meant by like he had never known. Another element where he's seeing the piles of bodies waiting for burial. And it says he grew sick. Careful. People read that and they say, oh, from the piles of bodies. Come on. Grandfather's mother and father, grandfather and grandmother were massacred. At 2 years old, he lay between his mother and father alive until great-grandfather Coyote Thunder found him. 4 days of laying between rotted corpses. He traveled this country. He saw the slaughter of people. He saw the bloated piles of bodies. When he said he grew sick, it wasn't from the bodies, it was from disease. What disease? One of the big ones, hopelessness. Those people had no hope. And that thread, that power, that demon of disease runs through all 4 of grandfather's prophecy. That frightens me the most. When grandfather said disease, yeah, we think about afflictions, pneumonia, cancer, strep throat. Some of the hideous ones today starting to rear their head where our antibiotics won't even touch. TB, big one. Staph infection, bigger still. But disease, hopelessness, helplessness, war, starvation, genocide, apathy. To grandfather, they're all diseases. They're all diseases. Then with that first prophecy, the warrior spirit said to grandfather, you may never see this. Even that spirit gave hope. Oh, grandfather could have seen it in his lifetime. But that spirit said, you may never see this. Because he left hope. That spirit knew that life is a series of choices. Life is a series of choices. Like grandfather once said, if you allow other people or outside circumstances to direct and dictate your choices, your life is no longer your own. And we are like a flea on an elephant. We are allowing so many to dictate our choices. Years ago, I thought to myself, gee, I'd like to ride my bike from the house to the Pine Barrens. I'd have been dead. There's no bike paths, no footpaths. There's no alternatives. That choice has been taken away from me. And you. And then grandfather meets up with this elder shaman. A man once lived in that tribe, and that shaman is aloof, saying, these people. When I visited Africa, even recently, when I visited South American tribes, the lament of the elders, the spiritual leaders, is we are losing our children to the cities and towns. They're not coming back. And unfortunately, those children are going to these cities and towns and getting into lifestyles worse than what they came from. Used to say you could tell a Native American or African village miles away by their laughter. People full of laughter and joy. So the elder that grandfather encountered, that spirit of the man, had so angry at his people at some time not listening to him. Not listening to that elder when he said, do not pick up these ways. Do not go into modern farming. They didn't listen. And like nature starves the deer in winter, when they exceed the carrying capacity of the land, they starved those African people. If those people were left alone, they'd have shrugged their shoulders and said, just another drought. We'll survive. But their numbers were too many, far too many. You figured with that I would think, wow, wake up call. They exceeded the carrying capacity. They're dying. We're well exceeding the carrying capacity. Well exceeding it. We're on borrowed time. No, we're out of time. It's the way I look at it. We are right at the threshold of decision. Right at that threshold. So much in that first prophecy. So many tendrils reaching into the second, the third, the fourth, and beyond. Just a challenge to you. There's a place in those 4 pages, 5 pages, whatever they are, those 4 prophecies written in that book, that alludes to the fact that there are more. There's 7, as in the sacred number. When I found that, about 2 months before grandfather left, I was pissed. And it was so obvious to me. So obvious. Was in that period 2 months before he left that he gave me the other 3. Anyway, We have come well past that first prophecy, and we are so deeply entrenched now into the second one. Grandfather said that once that second one hits, that the earth can no longer heal itself physically. That means if every man, woman, and child on earth pulled together to try to save it, she couldn't do it. It could not be done. It's got to be done spiritually. But like I say, careful with that word spiritually. I'm not talking about religion. Religion today is worship. That and a quarter will get you a phone call. I mean, yeah, it's nice to worship, but I worship every day, like Grandfather, where each step blesses the earth, and the earth blesses each step. Every time I look outside, I'm in the temples. That made by the hands of God. Spiritual. Wow. As I tell classes, look at a flock of sandpipers. When viewed up close, you see that they're individual birds, but when viewed from afar, you see that the flock takes on its own consciousness. It is no longer individual birds. All of a sudden, thousands of birds will be flying in one direction in a flash of an eye. Thousands of bellies turn to the sunlight and the entire flock changes direction. When they record that on video and play it back in slow motion, they can find no one bird that makes that turn, that initiates it. Instead, even science and technology has to bend its arrogant knee and say it seems like a consciousness which flows through the flock. It is. It's the same consciousness that flows through all of us. The Native Americans call it the spirit that moves through all things. The Taoists call it the force or life force. Same thing. One idea, one thought, one emotion can change the flock, can change the direction, the consciousness of humankind. We all make a difference in that consciousness, that spirit that moves through all things, like Grandfather said. But it's the difference that we make that is important. All right. I was just looking at this second prophecy, the one that we're in now. 4 paragraphs. 4 paragraphs. Holy crap, can that go on forever? What I'm going to do, I am going to read a couple of paragraphs. And then I'm going to come back to it. Because in these first 2, a lot happens. A lot happens. Grandfather awoke at the entrance of the cave, and once again, the memory of the warrior spirit still vivid in his mind, the spirit's words becoming part of his soul. When Grandfather looked out across the landscape, all had changed. The landscape appeared drier. There was no vegetation to be seen, and animals lay dying. A great stench of death arose from the land, and the dust was thick and choking, the intense heat oppressive. Looking skyward, the sun seemed to be larger and more intense. No birds or clouds could be seen, and the air seemed thicker still. It was then that the sky seemed to surge and huge holes began to appear. The holes tore with a resounding, thundering sound, and the very earth, rocks, and soil shook. The skin of the sky seemed to be torn open like a series of gaping wounds, and through these wounds seeped a liquid that seemed like an oozing of an infection, a great sea of floating garbage, oil, and dead fish. It was through one of these wounds that Grandfather saw the floating bodies of dolphins, accompanied by tremendous upheavals of the earth and of violent storms. As he held fast to the trembling earth, his eyes fell from the sky, and all about him, all at once, was disaster. Piles of garbage reached to the skies. Forests lay cut and dying. Coastlines flooded, and storms grew more violent and thunderous. With each passing moment, the earth shook with greater intensity, threatening to tear apart and swallow Grandfather. We are well in to that second sign. He's not just talking about the holes in the sky. He's talking about what's happening now. Global warming. It's so obvious. Even this book was written before global warming was a cliche. The prophecy, when he spoke it in 62, nobody thought of it. Going back, Grandfather awoke at the entrance of the cave once again. The memory of the spirit warrior still vivid in his mind, the spirit's words becoming part of his soul. That means a lot. One of the things I don't depict, you always hear me say, spirit. The spirits of the unseen and eternal. The spirit that you have within you, that is unique unto you, the spirit that I have within me. The spirit that moves through all things. But how rarely do I use the term soul? Very rarely. You see, I'm looking forward to this experimental philosophy class that I'm running, because this is the first time I'm going to address that concept of soul. To put it simply and oversimplify it, the soul is the core, the mind of the spiritual self. It is the core of all your beliefs, your direct connection to the great mystery, the Creator, to God. It is us in our purest and most enlightened form. The soul is the epitome of emptiness. Like I said, in my baskets, my pottery class, the spiritual side. It is not the basket itself that makes it useful. It is the empty space within. It surprised me as a child that a basket was one of the symbols of the shaman. But the basket, that symbology, was always empty, waiting to be filled. I look at the basket structure. with all we have been through spiritually, all the paths that we have taken that have interwoven to make that structure of the basket as our spirit. It is the empty space within it that is our soul, that makes it useful. It is that which the Creator can fill with wisdom, guidance, knowledge, prophecy. And the emptiness of that basket, that place of purity, is not shackled by our physical or spiritual minds. Not at all. It is our purest self. It takes us away from our prejudices, our judgment, our experience, our ego, away from who we are. Grandfather considered the soul to be that which dwells closest to the Creator. So when Grandfather told me that the Spirit's words became part of his soul, this went beyond the element of belief, of commitment. This was in its purest form. Grandfather at that point could not cast judgment, could not filter anything out. When that became part of his soul, that part of himself which is pure, he could not convey it in any other way. Like Grandfather would say, when I went into a learning situation, where I'd go out to one of these old piney characters and learn to gut and skin and butcher a hog or to make soap, the last thing he'd say to me is, forget you have a past, which is another way of saying empty your cup. That way you go into the learning purely. You don't bring yourself into afterwards. When I think back on the last class that I just ended yesterday, the way of the void is that part that I wish I came so close to delivering. That whole concept of what is the soul? What is this pure mind within the Spirit? I couldn't, because I didn't have a week left not to teach that. Not to teach that. When Grandfather looked out across the landscape, all had changed. The landscape appeared drier. There was no vegetation to be seen, and animals lay dying. You see, the area around the eternal cave, granted, is what we would consider desert. Beautiful sandstone bluffs. Red, yellow clays and soils, almost as if painted. Vegetation, certainly, in the form of scrub, in cacti, in mesquite, and all the rest, tumbleweed. But still vegetation. Nonetheless, enough for his people to migrate through in small bands and clans and survive as if in the Garden of Eden. When most people think of the desert, they think of the Sahara. Oh my God. Sahara, you might as well be in the middle of the ocean. If you don't import what you need, you're dead. You go into the Sahara like you're going to the ocean with a dive tank, a wetsuit, a buoyancy compensator, compass, timer, dive gauges, dive computer, fins, mask. In the Sahara, camels, caravans, But the desert around the eternal cave is lush. Very. Yeah, water is scarce, but not that scarce if you know where to look or you allow yourself to be guided. Here was a landscape that just a little while before had that lushness for a desert. The landscape appeared drier. There was no vegetation. When the impact of global warming hits, the area of the eternal cave will become the Sahara. Look at the maps. Deserts will become hotter, drier, more arid. Animals lay dying. That always confused me, because it stands to reason that animals would die first as the vegetation became depleted and dried. Right? Absolutely. This happened that fast. That fast. That literally the vegetation had died and the animals were succumbing to starvation. It is against the reality, the natural cycle, to have those animals die after the vegetation. Only could it be that vegetation died first, and the animals just went into starvation diet and ate what they could of it. Right here, there was no vegetation to be seen. It means the suffering of those animals were eating that dead vegetation, a vegetation that had died so quickly. Yet there was enough power in the shreds of barks and the dried leaves and the wilted buds to sustain an animal just a little bit longer. And they had eaten that stuff right to there was no vegetation to be seen, and animals lay dying. Holy crap, that's fast. That's frightening. That's scary. We look at the deer here when the winter blows in, and rarely when the snow hits, and you see them taking and eating cedar, not only to the bare bark, but the bark, anything that they can chew and get in their mouths, they will take. I've gone to cedar groves where snow has persisted a couple of weeks and seen nothing but like a mown field of tops of cedar. And nearby, the deer lay dying and the cedar was gone. That's what's happening. A great stench of death arose from the land. Of course, the corpses must have been catastrophic, from mice to snakes to jackrabbits to mule deer to the cattle of man. And the dust was thick and choking, that dry. the intense heat oppressive. Wow. Can't even imagine the world like that. Yeah, I've been to Sahara. I've seen it. I've experienced it. And all I could think there on the Sahara was, oh my God, it's coming. It's coming and coming fast. That first few lines of that second prophecy so permeated all of my thoughts when I was in the Sahara. This is what it could look like. My God, what have we done? What have we done? Looking skyward, the sun seemed to be larger and more intense. No birds or clouds could be seen, and the air seemed thicker still. That's what's happening. The sun's effect on the earth is intensifying. There is areas of this planet that have gone from lush forest to desert in a lifetime. I've walked in the jungles of the Amazon River Basin, and I'll come out of that beautiful steaming jungle. I'll look up through the trees and I'll see the sun, and all of a sudden I'll come to a clear cut, a slash and burn that no longer can even support the cattle of man or any crops. The soil has run into the Amazon River, and the sun seems larger, more intense, more frightening, burning the flesh. And as it gets that hot, the air does get thicker. You look at people who have respiratory problems in the summer, more and more and more are dying. It's epidemic. Epidemic. It was then that the sky seemed to surge and holes began to appear. The holes tore with a resounding, thunderous sound, and the very earth, rocks, and soil shook. He is getting almost to a point here, and you'll see it come next paragraph, where he likens the sky to a liquid. In fact, there's no separation in a lot of ways. He called it a fabric. Tor. Tor is so ghastly. Not cut, torn. A series of gaping wounds. Another analogy to the viciousness of the holes. And the earth, rocks, and soil shook. Okay. You know what that means? That hasn't happened yet. That has not happened yet. Not to the extent that grandfather felt it. That's yet to be. Oh, yeah. The earthquakes, the tremors have increased over the years. Look at San Francisco. How many killed now all over the world from earthquakes and tsunamis and stuff like that. Oh, the big ones haven't happened yet, but we're getting the first of them. The first of them starting with the holes. And each year increasing more and more and more. As I read, the skin of the sky seemed to be torn open like a series of gaping wounds. And through these wounds seeped a liquid that seemed like the oozing of an infection. A great sea of floating garbage, oil, and dead fish. A lot of people think the earth starts with terra firma, the ground. No. Starts with the sky. That's why he called it the skin. That's what he's alluding to, or the vision is alluding to. That we've got to develop a vision that reaches skyward. You know, for years I used to wrestle with this holes in the sky tearing the flesh, the fabric. Could it be a meteor? I don't know. Part of it could be. Especially with that resounding crash, thunderous crash. See, people have asked me, Tom, especially with the red skies, the third prophecy up, could there be a meteor involved? Yeah, there could be. In fact, I tend to lean that way, actually. But not a meteor of such catastrophic repercussions that supposedly wiped out the dinosaurs and only left a few sparks of furry life on the planet. Can't be. Can't be. But a meteor, yeah. That could push the domino. That starts the domino effect. Can disrupt the rest of Earth's balance. I think those holes will be torn open again at the end of the second prophecy. The initial, he says, torn open like a series of gaping wounds. A series. You know, a series. 1, 2, 3, 4. Maybe this opening in the sky. Possibly this opening in the sky. Definitely this opening in the sky is the first in a series. Oh, and we so pompously closed or diminished that hole in the sky. There's more yet to come. There's more yet to come. And you see, he attached the fabric of that sky to the very earth, to the core of the earth. There was no separation in that warrior spirit's mind or in grandfather's mind. That the core of the earth, does not end with the flesh of our mother. It ends with the skin of the sky. And he says that it oozes an infection like a liquid. What's a comet? Liquid. Frozen. Oh, you got to remember, I've wrestled with this bad boy for, holy mackerel, 46 years. Picked it apart, reread my journals. They haunt me. They cause me to lose sleep. They strike the fear of God into me. Actually, I shouldn't say that. Fear of God. Grandfather used to laugh at the concept of people looking at God like he sat behind some huge judgment stand with an open book, waiting to damn his children to hell. Would you damn your child to hell? An all-loving God? That's why grandfather preferred to call the great mystery grandfather, and in some cases, grandmother. Because the great mystery is both. The elder. If the Creator does sit up there with a big open book, he's probably say, Tom Brown, yeah, he screwed up again. Ha, bless his soul. You know? One of those things. But my Creator is a very loving Creator, not judgmental, like a grandfather or grandmother. A great sea of floating garbage, oil, and dead fish. It was through one of these wounds. That's what makes me think, whoa, maybe it is some sort of meteor or comet on a small scale that could blow the water of the ocean right through the sky. Oh, it's happened before. But that concept of the earth and her outer skin is so important. Because too often a person will say, look at that oil slick, and not look up and say, look at that oil slick. Like an oozing infection. It was through one of these wounds that grandfather saw the floating bodies of dolphins, accompanied by tremendous upheavals of earth and of violent storms. It's happening now. The storms have intensified. People's memory are so short-term. I remember coming off the island today. It was flooded. 30 years ago, if you had flooding like we had on that island today, it would have made the papers, the news. Now, it's a side note on a local radio station. Flood warnings are in effect. Everybody's driving through these puddles, some of them that are waist deep, as if another day on the island. Another day. 30 years ago, no, that was rare. Now it's commonplace. I don't know how many times I've seen that island flooded even in the last 3 months. More in the last 3 months than I've seen it flooded in the last 20 years. Short-term memory. We don't remember how things used to be before they got screwed up. Violent storms, tremendous upheavals of the earth. Got to remember, too, that time in the spiritual sense is not like time we know in the flesh. It's different. You got to be careful with it, because very seriously, time is considered differently. Like I tell people, when grandfather comes out of this second prophecy, grandfather spent the next 4 days at the cave entrance, though for those 4 days nothing spoke to him, not even the earth. Yet these two prophecies came to him within a day. 2 days, actually. You look at the time from the first shovel that broke the soils in Ethiopia to the holes in the sky. That's a while. That is a while. And then 4 days between the second and third prophecy tells you we're running out of time. As he held fast to the trembling earth, his eyes fell from the sky, and all about him, all at once, was disaster. We're talking a world out of control. Here as a man who has borne witness to clear cutting, to slash and burn, to oil drilling, to oil spills, to piles of garbage outside of cities, to all manner of things, to the Dust Bowl that we suffered in this country. And he calls this disaster. It must have been epic. It must have been frightening. Piles of garbage reached to the skies. Forests lay cut and dying. I bring you back to the Amazon. When 60% of that forest falls, we are at critical mass, a point of no return. At the end of that article, it mentions not only the disastrous climate change and storms, but disease. You want to grow up a bacteria? You put it in a petri dish. And what do you do with that petri dish with that nutrient agar? You close it and you stick it in an incubator. Give it a little heat. And my God, that thing takes over the petri dish. Forests lay cut and dying. Coastlines flooded, and storms grew more violent and thunderous. Oh my God, look at 2 years ago, how many hurricanes slammed here. Look where the coastline is going. Flooding, just as I recounted to you. It's an everyday thing on that island, every rainstorm. It's ridiculous. Storms are more violent. I haven't seen storms like this in my life. Not in the early years. Yeah, we had once in a while a blizzard roll in. Look at how many records have been broken. Record temperatures around here for October. My God, we're in short sleeve shirts. Shorts. Violent storms. It's now. It's happening. Grew more violent and thunderous. With each passing moment, the earth shook with greater intensity, threatening to tear apart and swallow grandfather. Where does the earth end? It ends at that fabric in the sky. What is he talking about shaking? The earth that ends out there, up there, where the holes are. That's what's shaking now. It doesn't take long for that to translate back into the very flesh of our mother here. Not just that outer cuticle. that raging, that disaster, everything else is taking place from the skin of our mother right up to the fabric of the sky. That's where the storms take place, the violent storms. And she is echoing them through volcanoes and earthquakes and tsunamis. You know, somebody asked me during break that they, the advent of, what I've been toying with for years and in all of this is, well, it doesn't seem likely that a comet or a small asteroid or whatever that hits the Earth is a result of anything we've done. It's you're right. It doesn't. Not that I can see, unless I don't understand, some things, the mechanisms behind it. But with the state of the earth that the way it is now, maybe that strike from whatever is just the way it's going to tip the domino effect. You know what I mean? Where it's just going to take existing problems and make them horrific. But then I say to myself, and like I said, I've been at this 47 years or whatever, trying to decipher this, picking it apart, going back to Prophecy Hill countless times. I think to myself, they once posed a question. Can the flap of a butterfly's wing over the Canary Islands or something off the coast of Africa affect the course of a hurricane that is bearing down on the Florida coast? They proved it out mathematically that it can. It can. So maybe in my limited Neanderthal brain, possibly we're doing something to the earth. Its magnetic field maybe, or the pollution that is carried in the atmosphere or whatever, that's somehow adjusting our planet to a point where what would normally not have hit us would have hit us. That kind of thing. I can't put it outside the realm of possibility. It's beyond my comprehension. But I think that if there is something like that, that is going to really compound the problem that we're already facing, it is going to start the domino effect. And I'm thinking at the last of the holes in the sky before those skies turn red, maybe that's when it's going to happen. Which would stand to reason why the skies might turn red. But the more I go with this, the more it's like, it just gets to be overwhelming. Overwhelming with the meaning that comes from these select few words of grandfathers. The thing was, I was there. My God, to see him tremble, to relive this story, this vision, it's unbelievable. Just the periods of long silence between sentences was sometimes overwhelming. And I don't know if it was to allow Rick and I time to think, to reflect, or whether it had to do with the time, deliverance of this prophecy. Maybe what he saw when he paused between two lines, it might have been moments or hours to when the spirit world, the Creator, was conveying these probable futures of man's destruction to grandfather, gave him time to think and reflect. Because in those periods of silence, I could sense grandfather going through an anguish, a torment. in the middle of this silence, breaking down in tears. There's just things I guess I'm not to figure out yet. Suddenly, the earth stopped shaking and the sky cleared. Out of the dusty air walked the warrior spirit who stopped a short distance from grandfather. As grandfather looked into the face of the spirit, he could see that there were great tears flowing from his eyes, and each tear fell to the earth with a searing sound. The spirit looked at grandfather for a long moment, then finally spoke, saying, "Holes in the sky." Not a hole, holes. Grandfather thought for a moment, then, in a questioning, disbelieving manner, said, "Holes in the sky. That's important." He came out of his soul at that point and back into the spirit and into the flesh. The baggage of his experience, his prejudices, his ego was let to seep in. Holes in the sky, and the spirit answered, saying, "They will become the second sign of the destruction of man." The holes in the sky and all that you have seen could become man's reality. It is here at the beginning of the second sign that man can no longer heal the earth with physical action. It is here that man must heed the warning and work harder to change the future at hand. But man must not only work physically, he must also work spiritually through prayer, for only through prayer can man now hope to heal the earth and himself. One paragraph. Suddenly the earth stopped shaking and the sky cleared. Out of the dusty air walked the warrior spirit, who stopped a short distance from grandfather. Proximity, a short distance. There's a reason for that. Where before, in this encounter with this warrior spirit, who intimately knew grandfather because of so many vision quests. As I said, that warrior spirit, anytime a big vision was delivered to grandfather, that warrior spirit was somehow part of it. So there was an intimacy there going back to grandfather's original visions. And what struck me when grandfather emphasized it is that spirit stopped a short distance from him. Grandfather was in his 40s. That should tell you how close the holes in the sky were to grandfather in his 40s, a short distance away. As grandfather looked into the face of the spirit, he could see that there were great tears flowing from his eyes, and each tear fell to the earth with a searing sound. Acid rain. Acid rain. Sterilizing our lakes, killing our trees. I look at that book that Charlie Little wrote, The Dying of the Trees, and how today whole forests of trees are dying of diseases that they can no longer fight off. Things that 100 years ago, 200 years ago, that forest was resistant to are now killing those trees, very similar to the dolphins, the poisoning from the red tides. This is the red tides of the air, weakening the immune system of the trees, allowing things like anthracnose and funguses and insect infestations to kill these trees, just as AIDS kills humans with common diseases like colds and flus and things we could normally fight off. That's why the tears fell with that searing sound of acid hitting, burning, scorching, killing, destroying. Part of it, too, is the earth is hot, hotter. Global warming, what a misnomer. How about global scorching, global incineration? They'd be better words. The Spirit looked at Grandfather for a long moment, then finally spoke, saying, holes in the sky, not singular, plural. How many more holes are we going to face? How many more tears in that fabric of consciousness? Each tear, each hole, each gaping wound, it gets worse. As I said, Grandfather thought for a moment, then in a questioning, disbelieving manner said, holes in the sky? That's Grandfather bringing in his self, which is not the wrong thing to do. But back a few paragraphs, I said that these things were imprinted on Grandfather's soul, that part of pure self, that part that has no question, that part of ourselves, the core of our spirits, our soul that obeys the Creator without question, that is that empty vessel waiting to be filled. He stepped from that and questioned it because it sounded so incredible, so impossible. They will become the second sign of the destruction of man. Now you got to remember, when the Spirit speaks of man, I guess I should have used the term mankind. Or humankind. It's a way of thinking. Grandfather was one that would say, gender has nothing to do whatsoever with spirituality. Nothing. However, if you look at Grandfather's upbringing, in his earliest days, he learned the wisdom of the women. before going on to the pursuits of the men. The thing is that grandfather would look at the woman entity very much like the earth. That mothering, nurturing, cradling, very, very sensitive approach. Where he looked at the pursuits of man as being more brutal, more aggressive, more taking, more hunting. That's not to say the women of grandfather's tribe were not excellent hunters and excellent scouts. Of course they were. But there is an instinct in all women to be mothers. An instinct in all men to protect. Somehow, that thinking of man was somehow convoluted. Protect. Protect the family from enemies, from starvation. But somehow we distorted it into we have to protect families from the earth. It was a paradox to grandfather how mankind could look at the earth as a breadbasket, as a place to get water and food, shelter, but yet at the same time in this unbelievable paradox to look at the earth something to be feared, like a disease. He had to insulate himself. What mankind didn't understand was his family was the earth. He lost that connection. And I don't think it was by accident that grandfather said, sign of the destruction of man. That is that thinking. Instead of being nurturing and healing and protecting like a mother, we have chose the other thinking. Grandfather said that it must be balanced. It must be balanced. And here it is not balanced. They will become the second sign of the destruction of man. The holes in the sky and all that you have seen could become man's reality. He's leaving it open. Could. There is hope. There is a chance. It is here, at the beginning of this second sign, that man can no longer heal the earth with physical action. There's got to be something greater than just the physical. This is my hope, my dream, that people will wake up and realize that life is not just the pursuit of the physical. The other half of life is the spiritual. It is here that man must heed the warning and work harder to change the future at hand. But man must not only work physically, he must also work spiritually. Through prayer. For through prayer can man now hope to heal the earth and himself. careful with that word prayer. We're not talking the Sunday go to meeting type where you get on your knees and fold your hands together. We're not talking that type of prayer. We're talking grandfather's prayer. How many times did you hear me say skills to grandfather? Watching him make a basket or a piece of pottery or an arrowhead was a visible form of prayer and worship. Grandfather moved like a prayer where each step blessed the earth and the earth blessed each step. Prayer is not words. Prayer is action. The Spirit here means the visible form of prayer. Action. But what is that action? Physical? Partly, yes. Partly. Getting closer to watching grandfather build that basket, where I quote, "The meaning of life is held in a basket." Visible form of prayer. This is the spiritual self. Watching grandfather make that basket. Watch that basket, that arrowhead, that bow drill, whatever. Wrapped in such appreciation, such awe, such wonder, such inspiration, where each thing he did glorified the Creator. The prayer I'm talking about is when that person goes to that food store and grabs that loaf of bread. It is a prayer. It is a connection back to the earth, where every day they are living that prayer, where every step blesses the earth, and the earth subsequently blesses each step. It's a give and take. When we take, we should also be giving back. Just that concept is a person moving closer to the earth, to God. It's not just words. Not in this context, not in the context of grandfather. Not the folding your hands or the bending of knee, but finding that prayer, that worship, that thanksgiving, that passion, that wonder, that awe in everything we do, every action we take. It's tough to read through these for me. I know it's time like, my God, he's all over the map. That's because I'm torn between teaching you and forgetting that there's a recording device rolling, and I could, and with me, it's like, where do I draw the line on this? 47 some years of deciphering this, of picking it apart, of saying, what did grandfather really mean? What to leave out now, even now? Then I'm expanding on it. There's volumes left out. Places I know I could go. But I hold back. Part of it's me, part of it is saying not yet. That's the prayer. That's the spirit that grandfather's talking about. That's the spirit the earth is talking about. The earth can only be healed spiritually. That is a movement back to the earth. its laws, its values, to quit touching the earth, to looking at the earth as if it's some disease, something to be insulated against, something to be shunned, something to be absolutely under our control. And we get so arrogant. We think we're so beyond those laws. And then a storm hits, or a tsunami, or an ice storm, or an earthquake, and it brings us to our knees. And we look at it and we call it the wrath of the earth, or the wrath of God. I look at it as a warning, because we're brought to our knees and we see how frail our communication systems are, and we see how frail our power grids are, and our heating systems, and our computer systems, and our cell phones, and everything else. But do you think that gives us a wake-up call? No, not at all. My voice, my emotion. The final paragraph. There was a long pause as grandfather thought about the impossibility of holes in the sky. Surely grandfather knew that there could be a spiritual hole, but a hole that the societies of the earth could notice would hardly seem likely. The spirit drew closer and spoke again, almost in a whisper. These holes are a direct result of man's life, his travel, and the sins of his grandfathers and grandmothers. These holes, the second sign, will mark the killing of his grandchildren and will become a legacy to man's life away from nature. It is the time of these holes that there will mark a great transition in mankind's thinking. They will then be faced with a choice to continuing following the path of destruction, or a choice to move back to the philosophy of the earth and to a simpler existence. It is here that the decision must be made, or all will be lost. Without another word, the spirit turned and walked back into the dust. This is where grandfather begins to make the transition, and it is a tough transition, of taking which he gathered, he was given in the core of his soul, the purest state of mind, that empty basket, and beginning to try to make sense of it as it applies to who he is, where he came from. To try to filter it through his judgment, his prejudices, and all the rest. And he wrestled with it, as I did. I wrestled with it. There was no doubt in grandfather's mind that there could be the spiritual holes. You know, so much of the spirit is lost to common humans. And grandfather at that time in his life, in his 40s, he had witnessed enough spiritual events that there was no doubt in spirit, yes, this could happen. but a hole that the societies of the earth could notice would hardly seem likely. But a hole, not holes, a hole in the sky. He's talking about the first one. The first one. The Spirit drew closer to grandfather and spoke again, almost in a whisper. Proximity. That Spirit went from stopping a short distance from grandfather to so close that grandfather could hear him whisper. This prophecy's drawing to a close. And that Spirit moves close. Close at that decision point. These holes are a direct result of man's life, his travel, and the sins of his grandfathers and grandmothers. These holes, the second sign, will mark the killing of his grandchildren and will become a legacy to man's life away from nature. Man's life away from nature. Away from the earth. Away from the laws of the earth. Far beyond the laws of the earth, disobeying carrying capacity, disobeying so many other laws that animals and plants must obey every day, and disobedience means death. It is the time of these holes that will mark a great transition in man's thinking. They will then be faced with a choice to continuing following the path of destruction, or a choice to move back to the philosophy of the earth and a simpler existence. As grandfather awaited that rising sun, he was beyond the choice. The power of the north that lay beyond him, as I've said, is the power of purification. Beneath the blankets of those snows lies the seed of a spring yet to be born. But what spring is it going to be? What will bring us there to that new dawn, that new enlightenment, that new consciousness? Is it after the children of the earth flee to the wild places and there create a new order and a new existence that is defined by the Creator and the laws of nature? Or is it a winter that we now face at this very threshold that humankind suddenly takes notice and says, we've got to stop living in this way? Once again, the fool I am, I believe that maybe now, maybe with the issue of global warming, of acid rains, of dead dolphins, of earth upheavals, of raging storms, of holes in the sky, that we will take notice. Unfortunately, I've been let down before. I have said to myself so many times with major and minor prophecies, surely people have got to realize. Surely when the dolphins wash up, surely when the acid rains, and damn it, surely when the holes appear in the sky. I see some things changing. Just like back when we worried as a global society about the holes we created in the sky. Stop the use of fluorocarbons. And the holes shrank. The holes shrank somewhat. Still to this day, there are scientists that deny that that was the problem. Just like today, there are scientists that believe that we are going through a natural trend, a natural cycle, when all the evidence points to the fact that we are causing it, we're creating it. I often like to think, whose payroll are they on? What and who is funding their research? That's what happened to Charles Little when he finally spoke out in that book, The Dying of the Trees, and I wish it was still in print, that he lost funding. He lost funding. Because he was one scientist who had the guts to say, look at all these findings. What are you, all fools? And got ridiculed, lost funding, was absolutely ostracized. But he had the guts to yell, stop. So today, we're at that threshold. We're at that age of choice. It is now that we have to have a wake-up call. We have to make a decision, a major decision, to either follow that path of destruction or find a gentler, more sustainable way of living with the earth. That consciousness in humankind must change. We must live like a prayer. We must stop the rush and dins and greed and convenience of our lives and look at things and say, what have we done? The age of instant gratification, the age of a disposable society is coming to a close. Our piles of garbage are reaching to the heavens. Our rivers still run polluted. Oh, certainly not as bad as they have been in many degrees, but still polluted. I would have loved to, at any given moment, when a politician gets up there and says, we're cleaning up the waters, to go out and get him a cup of the water he's cleaning up, and we say, drink it. They won't. It'd poison them. It'd poison them. Like I say, environmentalism is a big green bandwagon. When the going's good, everybody wants to jump on, all the rock stars, all the movie stars. But as soon as the going gets rough, they bail. Band-aid solutions where we need major surgery. People have got to be led back to the earth. People have got to become children of the earth again, not an alien life form like a cancer that has taken over this planet and will eventually kill its host. Or like a cancer, a horrible cancer. And the only cure, the only remedy, is us. And the Spirit says, it is here that the decision must be made, or all will be lost. Frightening. And he walks into the dust. Dust to dust. There's a certain metaphor in that. We could so easily be wiped off the face of the planet, but there'll be enough of us left. Enough of us left. I hope it doesn't get to that. I don't want to see the pain, the suffering, the starvation, the disease, the garbage, the pollution. I don't want to see the anguish, the hopelessness, the helplessness. The healing will take time. It'll be slow. But if we choose to follow the path of the earth and the Creator, it will be far less painful and debilitating. We are at the end of the second prophecy. That clock is ticking. The Spirit has moved close and is whispering in our ears. Wake up. Make a decision. Do whatever it takes to save the earth, but do not run away. I've spoken.